A divorced mom moved back to her old family house, just trying to start over. But when her dog started scratching at the basement wall, she never expected what was hiding behind it. A secret doorway, sealed for decades. Inside, dusty crates stacked high, bundles of old money, and a quilt stitched with someone else's initials. At first, it looked like treasure, but the truth was far stranger. Hidden letters revealed a shocking connection to a woman from wartime Europe, and a promise her father had kept in silence his whole life. But time is running out, and the fortune could vanish forever. Was this hidden room the key to saving her family's future, or the beginning of a legacy that could destroy it? What secrets will she uncover when the past finally breaks through the wall? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Maggie Turner's aging Honda Civic as she guided it into the familiar driveway of her childhood home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered farmhouse, its white paint peeling in places like old memories trying to escape. In her rearview mirror, she could see the moving van following close behind, carrying what remained of their life in the city. Beside her, 15-year-old Lily slumped in the passenger seat, earbuds firmly in place, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her phone. In the backseat, Scout, their golden retriever, pressed his nose against the window, his tail wagging with excitement at the new surroundings. Maggie's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she brought the car to a stop. "We're here," she announced, though her voice wavered slightly. Lily didn't respond, but Maggie noticed her daughter's shoulders tense. The farmhouse stood before them, 2 stories of faded glory and cherished memories. The wraparound porch sagged slightly on one corner, and the flower beds her mother had once tended so lovingly were now overrun with weeds. But the bones of the house were strong, just like the man who had built it, her father. "This is it?" Lily finally pulled out her earbuds, her voice dripping with teenage disdain. "It looks like something from a horror movie." Maggie swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to defend every weathered board and clouded window. "It needs some work," she admitted, "but it's home. It's our fresh start." Scout's excited bark broke the tension as he scrambled to get out of the car. Maggie opened her door, and the familiar scent of countryside, grass, earth, and approaching summer rushed to greet her. The dog bounded across the yard, his golden fur catching the sunlight as he investigated every new smell with enthusiasm. "At least someone's happy," Lily muttered, reluctantly emerging from the car. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the May afternoon was warm. The moving van's doors slammed, and the driver approached with clipboard in hand. "Where do you want everything, Mrs. Turner?" The word Mrs. still stung, even 6 months after the divorce. "Just Maggie, please, and you can start bringing things in through the front door. I'll unlock it." Her hands trembled slightly as she climbed the porch steps, each board creaking a familiar welcome. The key was old, but it turned smoothly in the lock. Her father had always kept everything in working order. The door swung open with a groan, releasing a wave of stale air and dust. Maggie stepped inside, memories washing over her like a gentle tide. The living room still held the faint impression of her father's favorite armchair, though it had been sold along with most of the furniture after his passing last year. Her mother's collection of porcelain birds had once lined the windowsills, catching the light and casting tiny rainbows across the hardwood floors. "Mom?" Lily's voice pulled her back to the present. "There's no Wi-Fi here, is there?" Maggie forced a smile. "We'll get it set up tomorrow. For now, let's focus on getting boxes inside." The next few hours passed in a blur of cardboard boxes and furniture arrangement. Scout supervised the entire process, his tail wagging as he followed the movers back and forth, occasionally picking up dropped packing paper and prancing around with it. As evening approached, the moving van pulled away, leaving Maggie and Lily surrounded by towers of boxes in various states of unpacking. The house felt both empty and full, empty of its previous life but full of possibility. Or at least, that's what Maggie tried to tell herself. She found Lily sitting on the floor of what would be her new bedroom, half-heartedly sorting through a box of clothes. "Hey, kiddo, how about we take a break and get some dinner? I saw a pizza place in town on our way in." Lily looked up, her face softening slightly. "Real pizza? Not one of your healthy cauliflower crust experiments?" "Real pizza," Maggie promised, grateful for this small moment of connection. "With actual cheese and everything." "Well, I guess this place isn't completely uncivilized then," Lily conceded, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. They ate their pizza at the kitchen counter, perched on boxes labeled kitchen, fragile in Maggie's careful handwriting. Scout lay at their feet, having already charmed an extra piece of pepperoni from Lily. The familiar comfort food helped ease some of the day's tension. and Maggie found herself sharing stories about growing up in the house. "Your grandfather built that back porch himself," she said, gesturing toward the window. "He came home from World War II with all these skills he'd learned, and he just kept adding little touches to the house. He always said a home should grow with its family." "What was he like?" Lily asked quietly, and Maggie's heart squeezed at the genuine interest in her daughter's voice. It was the first real question she'd asked since they'd arrived. "He was." Maggie paused, searching for the right words. "He was steady. Like an oak tree. No matter what storm came through, you knew he'd still be standing. And kind. He was so kind. He taught me how to drive in that back field, and he never once raised his voice, even when I accidentally ran over his favorite tomato plants." A small laugh escaped Lily, and Maggie felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could make this old house a home again. The moment was interrupted by a sudden scratching sound from the basement door, followed by Scout's insistent whine. The dog had moved from his comfortable spot by their feet, and now stood rigid, pawing at the old wooden door. "Scout, leave it," Maggie called, but the scratching continued, growing more urgent. The sound seemed to fill the kitchen, bouncing off the walls and empty counters. Something about it made the hair on the back of Maggie's neck stand up, though she told herself it was just the acoustics of the unfamiliar space. "What's his problem?" Lily asked, setting down her half-eaten slice of pizza. "Probably just mice," Maggie said, trying to sound casual. "This is an old house, after all. We'll need to check for any holes tomorrow." But Scout wouldn't be deterred. His scratching echoed through the house, the sound somehow both persistent and ominous in the growing darkness of evening. Maggie found herself staring at the basement door, remembering how she used to imagine monsters living down there when she was small. Her father had always assured her there was nothing to fear in the basement, just old boxes and memories. Now, watching Scout's determined efforts to get beyond that door, she wondered if perhaps there was something down there after all, something that had been waiting all these years to be discovered. The scratching continued, a steady rhythm in the quiet house, like a heartbeat trying to tell them a secret. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows as Maggie sorted through another box-marked kitchen. The morning air felt heavy, with late summer humidity, making the cardboard slightly damp beneath her fingers. She pulled out a stack of plates, carefully wrapped in newspaper from 3 weeks ago, when their life had been completely different. "Mom." Lily's voice carried down the stairs, thick with teenage frustration. "The Wi-Fi is totally dead. How am I supposed to do anything here?" "We just moved in yesterday," Maggie called back, unwrapping another plate. "The internet company is coming tomorrow." Lily appeared in the doorway, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "This is literally prehistoric. I can't even get a decent cell signal." "Maybe you could help me unpack instead?" Maggie suggested, gesturing to the sea of boxes surrounding them. "It might make the time pass faster." Before Lily could respond, Scout's bark echoed through the house. He stood at the basement door again, just like last night, his tail rigid and his ears perked forward. His whine grew more insistent, pawing at the door with determination. "He's being weird again," Lily said, momentarily distracted from her internet crisis. Maggie set down the plate she was holding. Scout had never acted like this before. He was usually such a calm dog. His persistence made her uneasy, but also curious. "Maybe we should check it out," she said finally. "There might be something down there we need to deal with anyway." She retrieved her flashlight from the emergency kit and opened the basement door. Scout bounded down the stairs ahead of them, his nails clicking against the wooden steps. Lily followed reluctantly, her phone's flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. The basement air felt cool and slightly musty. Scout made a beeline for the far corner, where he began scratching frantically at one section of the wall. The plaster there looked different, older, with hairline cracks, spider webbing across its surface. "Scout, stop that," Maggie said, but her voice lacked conviction. She moved closer, running her hand over the wall where Scout was pawing. The surface felt uneven, and when she tapped it with her knuckles, a hollow sound echoed back. "Did you hear that?" she asked Lily, who had drifted closer despite her earlier reluctance. "It sounds empty behind there," Lily said, her phone forgotten in her hand. Maggie's heart began to race. She remembered her father spending long hours in the basement, but she'd never known why. "Wait here," she said, heading back upstairs to retrieve a hammer from their toolbox. When she returned, she examined the wall more carefully. The plaster seemed thinner here, more fragile. Taking a deep breath, she began to chip away at it with the hammer. Chunks of plaster fell away easily, revealing darker spaces beneath. Scout's tail wagged faster as the opening grew larger. Finally, a section of wall crumbled away completely, exposing a dark doorway that seemed to lead into nothingness. Cold air whispered out of the opening, carrying with it the scent of secrets long buried. Maggie lifted her flashlight, her hand trembling slightly as she aimed the beam into the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat as dust motes danced in the light, swirling out from whatever lay beyond that hidden wall. The evening shadows stretched long across the basement floor as Maggie stared at the dark opening they discovered. Her flashlight beam seemed weak against the absolute darkness beyond the crumbling wall. She could feel Lily's presence beside her, practically vibrating with curiosity. "Should we?" Lily whispered, her earlier complaints about Wi-Fi completely forgotten. Maggie checked her watch, 6:45 in the evening. "Just a quick look," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Stay close to me." Scout had other ideas. The golden retriever trotted straight through the opening, his tail wagging enthusiastically, disappearing into the darkness beyond. "Scout," Maggie called out in a harsh whisper. She hurried forward, Lily right behind her, their footsteps careful and measured on the uneven floor. The beam of their combined flashlights revealed a room about 15 feet square. The air felt thick and heavy, carrying the musty scent of damp earth and time. Massive cobwebs hung from the ceiling like tattered gray curtains, swaying slightly in the disturbed air. Maggie's flashlight beam caught the ghostly movement, creating shifting shadows on the walls. "Look at all this stuff," Lily breathed, directing her phone's light toward the far corner. Wooden crates were stacked against the walls, most covered with heavy canvas that had once been white, but now carried decades of dust. Some of the crates reached almost to the ceiling, creating towering columns in the darkness. Scout weaved between them, his nose working overtime, tail still wagging. Near the center of the room, one crate had split open, its aged wood giving way to time and gravity. Papers spilled out onto the floor, and something about their color caught Maggie's attention. She moved closer, kneeling beside the broken crate. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the scattered papers. "These are war bonds," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Beneath the bonds lay stacks of old currency, the paper still crisp despite its age. "Mom?" Lily's voice cracked with excitement. "Are we rich?" Maggie couldn't answer. She stared at the contents of just this one broken crate, her mind racing to calculate what might be in all the others. The room suddenly felt too small, too close, the weight of this discovery pressing down on her chest. Scout's bark startled them both. He'd found something in another corner, a bundle wrapped in what looked like an old quilt. Maggie set down the bonds and moved toward him, grateful for the distraction from the overwhelming sight of all that money. The quilt was surprisingly soft under her fingers as she carefully unfolded it. The fabric had held up well in the cool, dark room. As she shook it out, her flashlight caught something in one corner, delicate stitching forming initials that made her pause. "What is it?" Lily asked, noticing her mother's sudden stillness. Maggie ran her fingers over the embroidered letters. They weren't her father's initials, or her mother's, or any combination of family names she knew. The discovery sent an unexpected chill down her spine. She clutched the quilt tightly, disturbed by this small detail that seemed to suggest there was much more to this hidden room than she'd first thought. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Maggie paced, waiting for her brother. She called Tom first thing, her voice shaking as she tried to explain what they'd found. Now, nursing her third cup of coffee, she watched his familiar blue pickup truck pull into the driveway. Tom Turner stepped out, toolbox in hand, his weathered face creased with concern. At 48, he looked so much like their father, it sometimes caught her off guard. "All right, sis," he called out as he approached the porch. "Show me this mystery room of yours." Maggie led him through the house and down to the basement, Scout trailing behind them. The morning light barely reached here, and their footsteps echoed against the concrete floor. When they reached the broken wall, Tom let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, running his hand along the edge of the opening. "Dad did this himself. See these marks? That's his handiwork. He sealed it up tight, meant for it to stay hidden." Inside the room, Tom moved methodically, examining each crate with the attention to detail he'd learned from their father. He tapped the wood, checked the joints, studied the canvas coverings. His expression grew more troubled with each discovery. "This money," he said, holding up one of the bundles they'd found. "These are 1944 series bills. And these bonds." He shuffled through the papers. "There's got to be thousands here. Maybe hundreds of thousands." Maggie watched his face carefully. "What are you thinking, Tom?" He set the money down slowly, his jaw tight. "If Dad hid this, he must have had a reason. Maybe it wasn't all good. He met her eyes. You know what it was like back then, during the war. A lot of things happened. Money changed hands. Sometimes people did things they weren't proud of. Dad wasn't like that. Maggie protested, but doubt had already begun to gnaw at her certainty. Her father had been honest, a man of principle, hadn't he? He taught them right from wrong, shown them by example. The thought that he might have hidden stolen money made her stomach churn. All I'm saying is, we need to be careful here, Tom warned. Maybe there's more to this than we know. Dad never mentioned any of this. Not the room, not the money, nothing. That's got to mean something. They spent the next hour documenting everything they could find. Tom insisted on taking photographs, making notes. Just in case, he said, though he wouldn't elaborate on what that meant. When he left, Maggie felt more unsettled than before. She tried to focus on unpacking, on helping Lily settle into her new room, but her thoughts kept returning to the hidden chamber and its mysteries. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Maggie found herself unable to sleep. The questions wouldn't leave her alone. Around midnight, she grabbed a flashlight and made her way back down to the basement, Scout padding quietly beside her. The hidden room felt different in the dead of night, cooler, more secretive. Maggie pulled on a pair of work gloves and began examining the crate with the broken corner more carefully. Moving aside the bundles of cash they'd found earlier, she noticed something else, a packet wrapped in oilcloth, yellowed with age but still intact. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, the paper thin and delicate. The ink had faded but was still readable. She picked up the first one, dated June 15, 1944, and began to read. "Dearest James," it began. Maggie's breath caught. James had been her father's name. "I pray this finds you well. The situation here grows more desperate by the day." The letter was signed Eleanor. Maggie grabbed another, then another. They were all from the same woman, all addressed to her father, spanning several months in 1944. They spoke of fear, of bombing raids, of impossible choices. Scout whined softly, pressing against her leg as she sank down onto an old crate to read. The letters told a story she'd never known, of a woman named Eleanor trapped in war-torn Europe, desperately trying to protect something precious, though what, exactly, wasn't clear from the earlier letters. Finally, she reached what appeared to be the last letter in the bundle. The paper was tear-stained, the handwriting more hurried than the others. As she read the final lines, Maggie felt her heart skip a beat. "I entrust this to you, the only man I can trust with my child's future." She stared into the shadows of the hidden room, shaken by the weight of what she'd just read. The money, the bonds, the mysterious Eleanor, it was all connected somehow. But how, and why had her father never spoken of it? The darkness seemed to press in around her as she sat there, holding the letters that had just upended everything she thought she knew about her father's past. Scout nudged her hand gently, as if sensing her distress, and Maggie found herself grateful for his steady presence in this moment of uncertainty. The final words of Eleanor's letter echoed in her mind, raising more questions than answers. A child's future, a desperate trust. What responsibility had her father carried all these years, hidden away behind these walls, and what did it mean for her? Now, morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patches on the worn wooden table where Maggie and Lily sat with their breakfast. Scout lay curled at their feet, occasionally lifting his head to sniff hopefully at their toast. "Mom, you look like you haven't slept at all," Lily said, studying her mother's face with concern. She wrapped her hands around her mug of hot chocolate, a morning ritual she'd insisted on keeping even through the chaos of moving. "I haven't, not really." Maggie reached into the folder beside her plate and carefully withdrew the stack of letters she'd found the night before. "Lily, I need to show you something." The teenager leaned forward, curiosity replacing her usual morning grumpiness. Maggie spread the letters across the table, careful to avoid the few remaining toast crumbs. "These were in that room. They're from someone named Eleanor, written to your grandfather during World War II. Maggie selected one of the earlier letters and began to read aloud. "Dearest James," she started, "the bombs fall closer each night. I fear we cannot stay much longer. What we have saved must be protected. You are the only American soldier who has shown true kindness, true understanding." Lily picked up another letter, her eyes widening as she scanned the faded text. "Mom, look at this one. The English is kind of broken, but she's talking about money, a lot of it." Together, they began sorting through the letters chronologically, piecing together Eleanor's story. The woman's English improved somewhat through the correspondence, but retained a distinct foreignness that spoke of her European origins. The fortune represents everything my family built over generations, Lily read from one letter. If we do not survive, it must be kept safe until those who remain can claim it. She looked up at her mother. So great-grandpa didn't steal it, he was protecting it? It seems that way, Maggie said softly. Eleanor trusted to him to keep it hidden until her family could come back for it. She ran her fingers over the delicate paper. But why didn't he ever tell anyone? Why keep it secret all these years? Scout, who had been dozing, suddenly lifted his head and padded over to the corner where they'd left the folded quilt from the hidden room. He sniffed at it intently, then looked back at Maggie with what seemed like meaningful eyes. What is it, boy? Maggie rose and walked over to the quilt. She'd assumed it was one of her mother's, but now, examining it more closely in the morning light, she could see it was different from the familiar patterns she remembered from childhood. The stitching was more intricate, done in an unfamiliar style, and the initials embroidered in the corner, E.R., definitely weren't her mother's. This was hers, Maggie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's quilt, not Mom's. A shiver ran through her despite the warm morning Sunday. How many other pieces of Eleanor's life lay hidden in that room, waiting to be discovered? Lily came to stand beside her, running her fingers over the careful stitching. So what do we do now? Maggie stared at the quilt, then at the scattered letters on the table. This wasn't just about finding unexpected money anymore. This was about a promise, one her father had kept faithfully, silently, taking the secret with him to his grave. Someone, somewhere, might still be waiting for this fortune to be returned. Eleanor's family might still be out there. We need to learn more, Maggie said finally. She began gathering the letters carefully, sliding them back into their folder. About Eleanor, about what happened during the war, about why she trusted Dad with all of this. She glanced at the clock on the wall. The local historical society would be opening soon. If anyone could help her start piecing together this mystery, they could. I'm going to head into town, she told Lily. Will you be okay here for a few hours? Lily rolled her eyes. Mom, I'm 15. Besides, Scout's here. The dog's tail thumped against the floor at the mention of his name. Maggie tucked the folder of letters into her bag, careful not to bend them. Each one felt precious now, a fragment of a story she needed to understand. Her father had carried this responsibility alone for decades. Now it had passed to her, and she was determined to uncover the truth behind Eleanor's trust and her father's silence. She gave Lily a quick hug, scratched Scout behind the ears, and headed for the door. The Historical Society might not have all the answers, but it was a place to start. Whatever Eleanor had entrusted to her father, whatever promise he had made, Maggie knew she couldn't ignore it. She had to find out what happened to Eleanor and her family, and why her father had kept their secret for so long. The Historical Society building stood like a dignified elder at the end of Main Street, its red brick facade weathered by decades of sun and rain. Maggie climbed the worn stone steps, clutching her bag containing Eleanor's letters close to her chest. The heavy wooden door creaked as she pulled it open, releasing the familiar scent of old books and furniture polish. Inside, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across the polished wooden floors. Display cases lined the walls, filled with artifacts from the town's past, old photographs, farming implements, and carefully preserved documents. Can I help you? The voice was gentle but firm, belonging to an elderly man who emerged from behind a towering shelf of records. His silver hair caught the morning light, and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. A name tag identified him as Mr. Harlan, Senior Archivist. Yes, please, Maggie said, approaching the desk where he stood. I'm Maggie Turner. I found some letters in my father's house, and I'm hoping you might be able to help me understand their significance. Mr. Harlan's eyes brightened at the mention of letters. Historical documents are our specialty, Miss Turner. May I see them? With careful hands, Maggie removed the folder and placed it on the desk. Mr. Harlan pulled on a pair of white cotton gloves before touching the delicate papers. As he began to read, his expression changed from professional interest to something deeper, recognition mixed with what looked like reverence. Eleanor Reinhardt, he breathed, his fingers hovering over the signature. I never thought I'd see her name again. Maggie leaned forward. You know who she was? Mr. Harlan nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the letters. Not personally, but I know of her. During the war, there were whispers about her family. They were wealthy industrialists who lost everything while fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe. He looked up at Maggie. These letters, they're extremely significant historical documents. He gestured to a quiet corner of the room where two comfortable chairs sat beside a window. Please, sit. This deserves a proper conversation. Once they were settled, Mr. Harlan carefully arranged the letters on a small table between them. During World War II, many European families, especially wealthy ones, found themselves in impossible situations. The Nazis were confiscating everything: businesses, homes, art collections, family fortunes. Some families managed to hide their valuables before fleeing, but they needed someone trustworthy to help protect these assets. And they chose American soldiers. Maggie asked, thinking of her father in his uniform, young and principled. Yes, Mr. Harlan confirmed. American soldiers represented hope to many Europeans. They were seen as liberators, but more than that, they were from a country far from the conflict, a place where things could be kept safe. His voice grew softer. The soldiers they chose weren't random. These families watched carefully, looking for men of character, men who showed kindness when they didn't have to, who demonstrated integrity in small ways. Maggie felt her throat tighten as she thought of her father, how he'd lived his whole life with quiet dignity. What happened to these treasures? Mr. Harlan's expression grew somber. Many were lost. Some soldiers died in battle. Others, well, the temptation of sudden wealth proved too strong. A few kept their word but could never locate the families after the war. The chaos of post-war Europe made tracking people nearly impossible. He picked up one of Eleanor's letters, handling it with utmost care. But some soldiers, like your father, kept their promises. They protected what was entrusted to them, waiting for the day when the rightful owners might return. Maggie watched as Mr. Harlan read through more of the letters, his expression growing more animated with each page. These tell us so much about that period, he said. The fear, the desperation, but also the hope. Eleanor's trust in your father wasn't just about money, it was about believing in human goodness during humanity's darkest hour. Did you ever hear what happened to Eleanor? Maggie asked. Mr. Harlan shook his head sadly. There were so many displaced persons after the war, millions of people trying to find their way home, or trying to build new lives. Records were destroyed, families separated. Some changed their names to escape persecution. Finding anyone specific became like searching for a needle in a haystack. He carefully gathered the letters together, his hands trembling slightly with age and emotion. What you found isn't just a hidden fortune, Miss Turner. It's a testament to faith and human decency. These families had to trust that the soldiers they chose would resist temptation, would honor their word even if they never returned. He placed his weathered hand over Maggie's and whispered, "If your father was chosen, it means he was the kind of man they believed would never betray them." Maggie felt tears well up in her eyes. She thought of her father, carrying this weighty secret all those years, never wavering in his commitment to a stranger's trust. Even when times were hard, when the farm struggled, he'd never touched Eleanor's fortune. The tears spilled over as she gathered the letters, tucking them carefully back into her bag. Her father's integrity had been absolute, unwavering. He kept his promise until the day he died, protecting not just the physical treasure, but the faith Eleanor had placed in him. As she stood to leave, Mr. Harlan's words followed her, a testament to faith and human decency. Her father had been that decent man, that keeper of promises, that guardian of hope. Walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight, Maggie wiped her eyes, knowing she now carried not just Eleanor's fortune, but the weight of that same sacred trust. Maggie's hands trembled as she unlocked the basement door. Behind her, David Cole stood patiently, his leather briefcase clutched in one hand. Mr. Harlan had recommended the retired banker as someone who could be trusted with delicate matters, and his calm demeanor helped steady Maggie's nerves. "Watch your step," she cautioned, leading him down the creaky stairs. Scout trotted ahead, his tail wagging as he guided them through the dim basement to the hidden room. "It's just through here." David's eyebrows rose slightly as Maggie revealed the concealed doorway. "Remarkable," he murmured, ducking to enter the space. He pulled out a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the musty darkness. "How long did you say this room was sealed?" "Since World War II, as far as we can tell," Maggie replied, watching as David circled the stacked crates. His movements were careful, methodical, like someone used to handling precious things. "Let's get some proper light in here first." David set up a battery-powered lantern he brought, filling the space with a warm glow. He pulled on white cotton gloves and began examining the first crate with careful precision. "These bundles here." He gently lifted out stacks of old European currency, spreading them across a small folding table he'd brought. "Unfortunately, most of these banknotes are worthless now. Many European currencies were replaced after the war, and others lost their value due to hyperinflation. Maggie's heart sank a little, but David was already moving on to another section of the crate. However, these. He carefully extracted several folders, filled with papers. These are far more interesting. He laid out document after document, examining each one through his reading glasses. War bonds, stock certificates, bearer bonds. All authentic from what I can tell. The quality of the paper, the watermarks, the printing methods, they're all consistent with pre-war European financial instruments. Scout settled at Maggie's feet as she watched David work. For over 2 hours, he meticulously sorted through the contents, making careful notes in a small leather-bound notebook. His expression remained neutral, professional, but Maggie noticed his hands moved with increasing care as he progressed through the documents. Finally, David sat back in his chair, removing his glasses to polish them with a handkerchief. Mrs. Turner, these certificates and bonds represent significant value. We're talking about millions of dollars at current market rates. Maggie felt her knees weaken and she grabbed the edge of the table. Millions? Yes. David's voice remained steady, matter of fact. Many of these are bearer bonds issued by Swiss banks. They're still valid. There are also stock certificates from companies that survived the war and have since grown considerably. The industrial certificates alone. He paused, making a quick calculation. Well, let's just say the total sum is substantial. But something in his expression made Maggie uneasy. I hear a "but" coming. David nodded, replacing his glasses. But there's a pressing issue. Many of these bonds have approaching maturity dates. Some were issued with 50-year terms, others with 75-year terms. They need to be claimed and redeemed before they expire. What happens if they expire? Maggie asked, though she feared she knew the answer. If no rightful heir claims them before the maturity date, the assets revert to the state. David began carefully organizing the documents back into their folders. And by rightful heir, I mean Eleanor's family or their legal representatives. Your father was the custodian, not the owner. Maggie sank into a chair, processing this information. How long do we have? Based on the dates I'm seeing, many of these bonds will begin expiring within the next 18 months. David's voice was gentle but firm. Time is not on our side, Mrs. Turner. But how can we possibly find Eleanor's family? We only have her first name, these letters, and this quilt. Maggie gestured to the carefully folded fabric sitting in the corner. David packed the last of the documents away, his movements precise. It won't be easy, but these papers might help. There are names of banks, companies, locations in Europe. Each one is a potential thread to follow. He closed his briefcase with a soft click. I can help you navigate the financial aspects, but finding the heirs, that's a different challenge entirely. Maggie walked David back upstairs, her mind racing with the enormity of the task ahead. At the front door, David turned to her. Mrs. Turner, what your father did, protecting these assets all these years, it was an extraordinary act of honor. Whatever you decide to do, that fact remains. After David left, Maggie returned to the basement. Scout followed close behind, his warm presence comforting as she stood before the hidden room. She secured the heavy door, testing the lock twice before turning to her faithful companion. We have to find Eleanor's family, she whispered to Scout, who tilted his head at her serious tone, or Dad's promise dies with us. Scout wagged his tail once, as if understanding the weight of her words. The dying afternoon light filtered through the basement windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Somewhere out there, Eleanor's family was waiting, whether they knew it or not, and Maggie had inherited more than just a hidden room. She'd inherited a sacred trust, a promise that demanded to be kept. The house creaked and settled in the darkness as Maggie tried to sleep, her mind still churning with David's revelations about the bonds. Scout had been restless all evening, pacing between her bedroom and the basement door until she finally gave in around 11 o'clock. Okay, she whispered, following him down the stairs. But this is the last time tonight. The hidden room felt different in the late hours, more intimate somehow, as if the shadows held secrets waiting to be discovered. Scout made straight for a stack of crates in the far corner, ones they hadn't thoroughly examined yet. His paws scratched insistently at the wooden slats, his tail wagging with purpose. What is it, boy? Maggie moved closer, shining her flashlight where Scout indicated. The beam caught something metallic glinting behind the crates. Stand back, let me see. She shifted the heavy crates carefully, mindful of their precious contents. The movement stirred up dust that danced in her flashlight beam. There, wedged in a narrow space between the wall and the crates, sat a rectangular tin box, its surface dulled by decades of darkness. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she worked it free. The tin was cool to the touch, its lid sealed with what looked like electrical tape, now brittle with age. She carried it to the small table they'd set up in the room and began carefully peeling away the tape. The lid resisted at first, then opened with a soft pop. Inside, protected from time and elements, lay several items wrapped in wax paper. Maggie unwrapped each one. With reverence, laying them out on the table, a folded document, what appeared to be a reel-to-reel tape in its original box, and beneath these, a photograph. Her breath caught as she lifted the photo closer to the light. The image, though faded, was remarkably clear, a moment frozen in time from nearly 75 years ago. Her father, so young in his military uniform, stood beside a woman Maggie instantly knew must be Eleanor. She was beautiful in a delicate way, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold both sadness and hope. But it was the third person in the photo that made Maggie's heart skip a beat. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, stood between them. She wore a dress that looked hand-sewn, her hair in neat braids, and her smile, despite everything happening in that war-torn time, was bright and trusting. "Eleanor's daughter," Maggie whispered, and Scout whined softly in response. She turned the photo over. Written in her father's precise handwriting were 3 names and a date: James Turner, Eleanor Weiss, Eva Weiss, March 1945. Eva. The name hit Maggie like a physical force. This wasn't just a possibility anymore, this was real. Eleanor had a daughter named Eva, and somewhere out there, that little girl had grown up. She might still be alive. Maggie's hands shook as she examined the reel-to-reel tape. Its box was labeled simply, "For the Future," in the same handwriting. The tape itself looked intact, but she had no way to play it. Her father had owned a reel-to-reel player years ago, but it had been sold at a garage sale long before his death. She sat heavily in the chair, the photo in one hand and the tape in the other. Questions tumbled through her mind. Was Eva still alive? Where had she and Eleanor gone after the war? Why hadn't they ever come back for their fortune? The little girl in the photo would be in her 80s now, if she had survived. Scout rested his head on her knee, his warm brown eyes full of understanding. Maggie scratched behind his ears absently, still studying the photo. There was something about the way her father stood, protective, almost paternal, that spoke volumes about his character. He had kept this promise for decades, waiting for a family that never returned. "Good boy," she murmured to Scout. "You knew this was here, didn't you? Just like you knew about the room." Her faithful companion had led her to not one, but 2 crucial discoveries. She wondered what else he might help her find. The night seemed to wrap around them like a blanket as Maggie carefully rewrapped the tape and document, placing them back in the tin box. The photograph, though, that she kept out. It was both evidence and inspiration, a tangible link to the past and possibly her key to the future. Making her way back upstairs, Maggie felt a new sense of purpose. The face of that little girl, Eva, would be her guide. Someone, somewhere, must remember her. The Historical Society, old military records, European databases, she would search them all. She had to find Eva before the bonds expired, had to fulfill her father's promise to protect this legacy until it could be returned to its rightful owners. In her bedroom, Maggie placed the photo carefully on her nightstand, propping it against her reading lamp. The 3 faces looked back at her father, Eleanor, and little Eva, their frozen smiles both encouraging and challenging. Scout settled into his bed beside her own, sighing contentedly as Maggie sat on the edge of her mattress. The moonlight filtered through her curtains, casting a gentle glow over the photograph. Maggie touched the image of the little girl gently, tracing the outline of her face. "If she's alive," she whispered, "I'll find her." Maggie's dining room table had transformed into a makeshift research center. Stacks of printed documents, folders filled with photocopies from the Historical Society, and her laptop formed a protective wall around her usual spot. Every evening after work, she'd settle in with a cup of coffee, determined to trace Eleanor's path through history. The genealogical service she'd subscribed to wasn't cheap, but Maggie couldn't put a price on keeping her father's promise. She'd started with the basics: Eleanor Weiss, immigrant, circa 1945. But thousands of records matched those simple parameters. Each night, her eyes would grow tired from scanning endless lists of names, dates, and places. "Mom, you need to eat something," Lily said one evening, placing a sandwich beside her mother's laptop. "You've been at this for hours." Maggie looked up, blinking away the screen's glare. Her daughter stood there in her pajamas, concern written across her face. "What time is it?" 9:30, Lily replied, pulling up a chair. "Here, let me help. 2 pairs of eyes are better than one." The gesture touched Maggie deeply. Lily had been spending more and more evenings at home, passing up invitations to movies and mall trips with friends to help with the search. Their shared mission had created a different kind of bond between them, one built on mutual purpose rather than just mother-daughter obligation. "Look at this one," Lily said, pointing to a passenger manifest. "The age matches, and she's traveling with a child named Eva." Maggie leaned in closer, hope rising as it always did when they found a possible match. But the destination was wrong. This Eleanor Weiss had landed in New York, while their Eleanor, according to her father's letters, had arrived through New Orleans. Scout lay under the table, his tail thumping occasionally when one of them would sigh in frustration. He'd taken to staying close during these research sessions, as if lending his own kind of support. Weeks passed this way. Maggie created spreadsheets to track their findings, pinned maps to the wall with possible migration routes marked in red. She joined online forums for people searching for displaced families from World War II, sharing what little information she had, while carefully omitting any mention of the fortune. The breakthrough came on a Sunday afternoon. Lily had canceled plans for a movie marathon with her friends, instead sprawling on the living room floor with her tablet while Maggie worked at her laptop. "Mom!" Lily's voice cracked with excitement. "Mom, I think I found something." Maggie rushed over, her heart pounding as it did every time they discovered a new lead. But this time felt different. Lily had been searching marriage records from the 1960s, thinking to look for Eva rather than Eleanor. Eva Weiss, Lily read, her finger trembling as it traced the screen. Married June 12, 1968, to Michael Davidson in Springfield, Illinois. The age would be right, Maggie said, trying to contain her hope. And look, her mother's name is listed as Eleanor Weiss. They spent the next hours following this thread, using every research tool at their disposal. Eva Davidson née Weiss had moved several times over the decades, but property records showed a current address 2 states away. She'd be 84 now, Maggie calculated, her hand shaking as she wrote down the phone number they'd found. If she's still alive, Lily gripped her mother's arm. "Call her now." But Maggie shook her head. "It's too late tonight, and this needs to be handled carefully. We need to be sure it's really her." She pulled out the old photograph, studying the little girl's face once again. Could that child have grown into the woman whose number now sat on a piece of paper before her? What would she say when Maggie called? Would she even remember the American soldier who had protected her mother's fortune? Scout patted over, sensing the emotional charge in the room. He nosed the photograph gently, then looked up at Maggie with those knowing eyes. "Tomorrow," Maggie said, running her fingers through his golden fur. "First thing tomorrow." Lily hugged her mother tightly. "We found her, Mom. We actually found her." Maggie returned the embrace, feeling the weight of generations in that moment. Her father's promise, Eleanor's trust, Eva's inheritance, all of it rested now on a phone call she would make in the morning. The evening wrapped around them like a warm blanket as mother and daughter sat together, Scout at their feet, sharing the comfortable silence of those who have accomplished something meaningful together. Outside, crickets chirped their evening song, and a gentle breeze rustled through the old farmhouse. Maggie clutched the phone number, staring at the digits she'd scribbled on paper, her heart pounding. "Tomorrow," she whispered again, "I call." Maggie sat at her kitchen table early the next morning, watching steam rise from her untouched coffee. The phone lay before her like a living thing, threatening and full of possibility. She'd been up since 5 o'clock, too nervous to sleep, rehearsing what she would say. Lily shuffled into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess. "You haven't called yet. It's only 7:15, Maggie said, glancing at the clock. "Too early." Scout rested his head on Maggie's lap, offering silent support. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for his steady presence. The minutes ticked by slowly. Lily made toast but barely touched it, watching her mother with worried eyes. At 8 o'clock, Maggie picked up the phone, then set it down again. "Mom," Lily said softly, "Grandpa wouldn't have waited." The words hit home. Maggie thought of her father, his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of duty. He'd carried this secret for decades, protecting a stranger's trust. Now it was her turn to be brave. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. Each ring seemed to last forever. On the 4th ring, just as Maggie was about to lose her nerve, someone answered. "Hello?" The voice was warm, aged but clear. Maggie's heart thundered. In her chest. "Hello, is this Clara Davidson?" "Yes, it is." A note of caution entered the woman's voice. Maggie took a deep breath. "My name is Maggie Turner. I'm calling because... Well, this may sound strange, but I believe my father knew your mother during World War II. His name was James Turner. He was a sergeant in the United States Army. The silence that followed seemed endless. Then came a sharp intake of breath. The American soldier, Clara whispered. My mother. She always told me about an American soldier who helped us. I thought she imagined him. That it was just a story she told herself to cope with everything we lost. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't a story. I have proof. I found letters your mother wrote to my father, and a photograph of them together. With you. A photograph? Clara's voice cracked. I was so young when we left Europe. I barely remember anything from that time. Mother spoke of it sometimes, but she died 20 years ago, taking those memories with her. Or so I thought. Lily squeezed her mother's hand, encouraging her to continue. There's more, Maggie said carefully, much more, but I don't think this is a conversation we should have over the phone. Would it be possible to meet in person? Yes, Clara replied without hesitation. Yes, please. I live in Springfield, Illinois. Could you? We can come to you, Maggie offered. My daughter Lily and I could drive up this weekend if that works for you. They spent the next few minutes arranging details. Clara lived in a small house near the center of town. She gave Maggie the address and suggested meeting Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. I'll make coffee cake, Clara said, her voice warming. My mother's recipe. She always said proper conversations need proper cake. Maggie smiled, thinking of her own mother's similar sayings. That sounds perfect. Before hanging up, Clara paused. Miss Turner, Maggie. Thank you for finding me. Mother always said that soldier was the most honorable man she'd ever met. I see his daughter is cut from the same cloth. The words struck deep, bringing fresh tears to Maggie's eyes. Your mother trusted my father with something precious. It's time that trust was honored. After saying goodbye, Maggie set the phone down with shaking hands. The weight of decades seemed to press down on her shoulders, her father's silence, Eleanor's faith, Clara's memories, all converging in this moment. Lily wrapped her arms around her mother's shoulders. You did it, Mom, she whispered. You found her. Maggie leaned back in her chair, emotionally drained. Scout pressed against her legs, offering his steady canine comfort. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting a golden glow over everything. I keep thinking about Dad, Maggie said softly. All those years he kept this secret, protecting Eleanor's trust. He never said a word, not even to Mom. Because he promised, Lily said simply, and now we're keeping his promise too. Maggie collapsed into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. Lily hugged her tight, whispering words that brought tears to Maggie's eyes. Grandpa's promise is finally being kept. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking this moment when past and present merged. When a soldier's long-held secret began its journey toward resolution. Outside, birds sang their morning songs, oblivious to the weight of history unfolding within these walls. The future beckoned, full of possibility and the chance to fulfill a promise decades in the making. The autumn morning painted the highway in shades of gold and crimson as Maggie's car wound through the Illinois countryside. Beside her, Lily cradled the carefully wrapped bundle containing Eleanor's quilt, the weathered letters, and the precious photograph. Scout had stayed behind with Tom, but his absence felt right somehow. This moment belonged to the human hearts involved. Are you nervous? Lily asked, glancing at her mother's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. Maggie managed a small smile. A little. Okay, maybe a lot. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. It's just, this feels so big, you know? Like we're carrying pieces of someone's life story. The GPS guided them through Springfield's quiet streets until they reached a neighborhood lined with mature maple trees. Small, well-tended homes sat back from the sidewalk, their front yards adorned with late-blooming flowers and seasonal decorations. 415 Oak Street, Maggie read aloud as they pulled up to a modest single-story house painted pale yellow. Window boxes overflowed with chrysanthemums, and a well-worn welcome mat sat on the front steps. They sat in the car for a moment, gathering courage. The house looked warm and inviting, but the weight of history made even this simple visit feel momentous. Ready? Lily asked, squeezing her mother's hand. Maggie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They walked up the concrete path, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. Before they could ring the doorbell, the door opened. Clara Davidson stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her heart. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair swept back from her face and eyes that held both wisdom and warmth. those eyes now filled with tears as she took in her visitors. "You look just like him," she whispered, staring at Maggie. "James, your father. Something about your eyes." Maggie felt her own tears start to fall. "Hello, Clara." For a moment, they just stood there, 3 generations connected by a promise made in wartime. Then Clara stepped forward and wrapped Maggie in a tight embrace. Come in, she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The coffee cake is just cooling." The inside of Clara's home reflected its owner, comfortable, well-loved, filled with photographs and memories. They followed her into a sunny kitchen where the promised coffee cake sat on the counter, its cinnamon sugar topping glistening. "Please, sit." Clara gestured to the small kitchen table, already set with delicate china cups and small plates. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been up since dawn. I couldn't sleep, knowing you were coming." Lily carefully placed their precious bundle on the table while Clara poured coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for her. The familiar ritual of serving refreshments seemed to calm everyone's nerves. "We brought something," Maggie said softly. She reached for the bundle, carefully unwrapping it. "Actually, we brought several things that belong to you." Clara's hands trembled as she touched the folded quilt. "I remember this," she whispered, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. "Mother made it during the war, in between air raids. She used scraps from our old clothes, anything she could find really." She lifted it to her face, inhaling deeply. "It still smells like her cedar chest." Maggie shared a glance with Lily, both moved by Clara's reaction. "There's more," she said, sliding the packet of letters across the table. Clara's tears fell freely now as she recognized her mother's distinctive handwriting. "I never knew these existed," she said, carefully opening one. "Mother spoke often about the American soldier who helped us, but I thought, well, after she died, I convinced myself it was just a story she told to comfort herself about everything we lost." She read a few lines, translating the German phrases under her breath. "She was so afraid back then," Clara explained, looking up. "Everyone was, we didn't know who to trust. But your father." She shook her head, overcome. "Your father gave us hope when we had none left." Maggie reached into her bag and withdrew the final item, the photograph. She handed it to Clara, who gasped. "Oh my God," Clara breathed, touching the image with trembling fingers. This is from the day we left. I was only 5 years old." She traced the outline of her mother's face in the photograph. Look how young she was. And so brave, even though she was terrified. In the photograph, Eleanor stood straight and proud beside James Turner in his uniform, her hand resting protectively on young Clara's shoulder. Despite the formal pose, there was warmth in their expressions, a hint of the trust that would bind their families together across decades. "I remember bits and pieces," Clara continued, still staring at the photograph. "The smell of wool uniforms, the rumble of trucks. Your father gave me chocolate, real American chocolate. Mother said it was the first time I'd smiled in months." Lily leaned forward, fascinated. "What happened after? Did you come straight to America?" Clara shook her head. "We went to Switzerland first, then England. Mother worked as a nurse while we waited for our papers. We didn't arrive in America until 1947. She smiled sadly. "Mother never stopped believing that someday, somehow, we would recover what we'd left behind. But as the years passed, I think she made peace with losing it. She said having our freedom and our lives was treasure enough." "She never lost it," Maggie said softly. "My father protected everything, exactly as he promised." Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over Maggie's, her touch warm and firm. "Your father was our guardian angel," she said, voice thick with emotion. "And now, you are mine." The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the 3 women as they sat surrounded by pieces of the past, the quilt, the letters, the photograph that had waited so long to come home. In that moment, they were more than strangers meeting for the first time. They were the keepers of a promise, the guardians of a trust that had survived war, distance, and time itself. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of David Cole's office, casting warm squares of light across his polished desk. Maggie sat beside Clara, watching as David methodically arranged the paperwork before them. Lily perched on a chair near the window, occasionally glancing up from her phone to observe the proceedings. "Everything appears to be in perfect order," David said, adjusting his reading glasses. "The bonds are completely legitimate, and their current value." He paused, double-checking his calculations. "Well, it's substantial. More than enough to secure several generations of financial stability." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she signed each document. I still can't believe this is real, she said softly. All these years, Mother's treasure was safe, waiting for us. David smiled, his usually formal demeanor softening. Your mother was a remarkably brave woman, and James Turner was a man of extraordinary integrity. This kind of trust. He shook his head. It's rare to see such promises kept across decades. As Clara finished signing the last document, she turned to Maggie with determination in her eyes. I want you to keep part of this, she said firmly. Maggie began to protest, but Clara held up her hand. Please, let me finish. Your father protected this for my family at great personal risk. He never touched a penny of it, never spoke of it, carried this secret to his grave. She reached across and squeezed Maggie's hand. You and Lily are as much a part of this story as I am. Please accept this as a token of our gratitude. David cleared his throat. If I may suggest, we could structure this as a split transfer. Clara would retain the majority of the assets, while a portion could be placed in trust for Maggie and Lily. Maggie looked at her daughter, who had put down her phone and was watching intently. The farmhouse needed work. The roof leaked, the wiring was ancient, and the heating system wheezed through every winter. And Lily's college fund. Maggie had been lying awake at night wondering how she'd manage it alone. Maggie's voice caught. Thank you, Clara. Dad would be proud to know his promise helped both our families. David spent the next hour walking them through the details. When everything was finalized, they stood in the parking lot, squinting in the bright afternoon Sunday. What will you do first? Clara asked, hugging Maggie goodbye. Maggie didn't hesitate. The Historical Society, she said. Mr. Harlan helped us piece this mystery together. I want to make sure other stories like ours aren't lost. Later that week, Maggie sat across from Mr. Harlan in the cramped Historical Society office. His eyes widened as she explained her proposal. A dedicated fund? He asked, his voice quavering with excitement. For preserving wartime correspondence and documents? Not just preserving them, Maggie explained, but digitizing them, making them accessible. There must be other stories out there, other promises kept, other acts of courage and trust that deserve to be remembered. Harlan's eyes filled with tears. My dear, you have no idea what this means. We've been struggling to maintain our archives, and so many precious documents are deteriorating. Over the next few months, the farmhouse transformed. Maggie hired local contractors to repair the roof and update the electrical system. The creaky furnace was replaced with an efficient heating system. Fresh paint brightened the walls, and new furniture filled the rooms, though Maggie kept several of her parents' beloved pieces. Lily threw herself into decorating her room, finally seeming to accept the farmhouse as home. She even convinced Maggie to buy an old upright piano she'd found at an estate sale, promising to restart the lessons she'd abandoned years ago. The Historical Society flourished too. Mr. Harlan hired 2 part-time assistants to help with the preservation project. They called it the Eleanor Trust, in honor of the woman whose faith in an American soldier had started it all. Stories began emerging. Letters, photographs, diaries, each one a testament to the bonds forged in humanity's darkest hours. Clara visited often, bringing coffee, cake, and stories about her mother. She helped the Historical Society translate German documents and shared her own memories of the war years. Sometimes she and Maggie just sat on the porch, watching Lily practice piano while Scout dozed at their feet. On one such evening, as summer faded into autumn, Maggie sat alone on the porch swing. The setting sun painted the cornfields gold, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of ripening apples from the old orchard. Inside, Lily was playing a piece she'd been practicing for weeks, the melody floating through the open windows. Scout lay at Maggie's feet, his tail thumping contentedly against the wooden porch. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, remembering how his persistence had led them to the hidden room. Without him, Eleanor's treasure might have remained forever sealed behind that wall, her mother's story untold, her father's promise unfulfilled. We found more than treasure, Maggie whispered to Scout, her voice blending with the piano notes and the evening birdsong. We found the truth, and we kept his promise. Scout lifted his head, looking at her with wise, gentle eyes, as if he understood exactly what she meant. The last rays of sunlight gilded the fields, and Maggie felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. In this moment, on this porch, with music filling the air and memories filling her heart, she knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.